This episode of Bright Hearth is brought to you by Garlands of Grace and our supporters at patreon.com.
As Christ rules over his church for her salvation, so nothing yields more advantage or comfort to the wife than to be subject to her husband. To refuse that subjection by means of which they might be saved is to choose destruction. He that loveth his wife, an argument is now drawn from nature itself, to prove that men ought to love their wives. Every man by his very nature loves himself, but no man can love himself without loving his wife. Therefore the man who does not love his wife is a monster. The minor proposition is proved in this manner. Marriage was appointed by God on the condition that the two should be one flesh, and that this unity may be the more sacred. He again recommends it to our notice by the consideration of Christ and his church. Such is the amount of his argument, which to a certain extent applies universally to human society. To shew that man owes to man, Isaiah says, "Hide not thyself from thine own flesh." John Calvin commenting on Ephesians 5.
Well, welcome to our very first episode of Bright Hearth here in the year of our Lord, 2023. Welcome back, listeners. I hope that you enjoyed your Christmas celebrations and didn't miss us too much on that dark week. You can probably hear from my voice. I'm still a little bit sick. So we got a little bit behind in our recording schedule. Kind of tough to record when you are hacking up a lung. So you're welcome for not putting that on the podcast and attempting to force you to listen to it. But we're back here in 2023 with a little bit of a different format here for our first episode. Lexy is not here with us, and that was not my voice in the cold open, though I know it sounded almost as manly. That was the voice of my good friend, Eric Conn. Eric, say hi to the listeners.
Hello, Bright Hearth listeners.
Eric,
some of the best people, by the way.
Yeah, so true. Like Hard Men podcast listeners, Bright Hearth listeners.
Tight competition.
Tight competition.
It really is.
Eric is, of course, a co-laborer here with us in Ogden, and good man, good dad, good husband, and a lot of experience pastoring, and also the host of the Hard Men podcast and with us on the King's Hall. You guys all know who Eric is, but I mean, just in case any of you have been under a rock, he's joining us here today. And also Deacon Ben Garrett. Ben, can you say hi to the listeners?
Yeah, hi, Bright Hearth listeners.
The occasion for this episode is that we were having a banger of a conversation in the basement of Refuge Church, and we were talking about counseling, and we were talking about marriage counseling particularly, and some of the things that we've learned in our own marriages and how they apply to different counseling situations. And I said, gentlemen, can we just record a conversation about this right now? Because it's so relevant to what we've been talking about in this season of Bright Hearth on marriage as the heart of the productive Christian household. And it gets to the heart of some questions that come up over and over again in our messages on Patreon. We get messages all the time from listeners. Can you address this subject? I need help with this issue in my marriage. Lexy and I have talked about this quite a bit. And it's the issue of, I think the way to frame it is the relationship between a husband's authority as the head of his house and also his wife's duty to be his helpmeet, when it comes to her insight into areas where she thinks that he is failing or could do better or sinning or some spectrum of, I wish my husband would do this different, would think this way differently. And so really, I think there's a gamut of answers that you'll hear in the spheres that we run in, where we will say the word patriarchy positively, and we are all about husbands loving and leading his wife and his home as the head of his home. We're all about encouraging men that they have real authority and headship in their home, and that wives are to submit to their husbands. But then you have this question: can she correct him? If so, how? What are the contexts? What are the rules? And how should a husband respond? And so maybe the way we could frame this conversation first would be to just say that there are some ditches on either side of the road here. One ditch, I'll throw one out, and then I'll ask you guys if you can think of any other ditches that a husband and wife might fall into. One ditch might be something like the really hypercritical wife. We've talked about this, wives who nag their husbands, who say basically they have devoted their life as their sole pursuit will be to make sure that their husband never misses a sin that he commits.
She is the Holy Spirit in his life, bringing conviction.
Yeah, the Spirit has become incarnate in her, and that's her duty in life. And it doesn't matter if it's public, in front of his friends, church. If he so much as gets a detail wrong in an anecdote he's telling, it's like, honey, that was not on Thursday. That was a Tuesday. That was actually a Tuesday. I don't know if you heard me.
Not actually in the morning, honey. It was in the afternoon.
It was in the mid-morning. I don't know if that matters. Okay, continue, though.
I just thought I should correct that.
It is so annoying when wives do that.
So annoying. It's annoying when anybody does that.
Anyone.
But there's particularly annoying when this woman who is supposed to be like ride or die, have your back, you're, respecting her man is like nitpicking the details of an anecdote. So that's obviously a ditch of the hypercritical wife. And this isn't I think we could make an a fortiori argument here that like a how much more argument. If that would be annoying to do to anybody, how much more is that sinful to do to the man that you have a duty to respect and encourage and help and be a covering and his glory? What other ditches do you guys see? Any other comments on that?
Yeah, it's interesting, Brian, because I think you've mentioned this in past episodes that we've done on the Hard Men podcast, but when you're looking at Scripture and it says things like, wives be subject to your husbands, submit to your husbands, we can pretty easily infer that that's something that is actually hard for wives to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like Paul has to command this because that gets to the heart of the tendency for women, which is going to be you see something wrong with your husband or a decision he's made, and so you're like immediately you want to usurp the authority.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what we'll get at is there's actually a biblical wise way to appeal. And there's a process for that. And then on the other hand, I would say the other ditch, and this gets to the first John Calvin quote that I read, but is also implicit in the text, is that men tend to be authoritarian tyrants. And so we do definitely have this tendency as men. I think this is one of the things we were talking about earlier, where our wives will come to us and they will say, hey, I want to give some input here. And our first knee-jerk reaction before... I know I do this before even hearing.
Yeah,
it's just to say no. I know what I'm doing to get out of here. Yeah, I know. and I think what John Calvin is getting at too is that the problem with this is you're shooting yourself in the foot. She's one flesh with you. God gave her to you to help you, to be your helpmeet.
Yep.
And I think something Brian said in our conversation earlier. Did you not marry a wise woman?
Yeah, that's right.
Is this woman not wise? So then why would you be a monster and not listen to her very valuable input? Now, she could be wrong.
Sure.
But I think as husbands, you should know, hey, we're prone to be tyrants. And as wives, you should know, we're prone to not submit and not be subject and to nag and et cetera. That gamut of sins.
Absolutely. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, one of the other ditches, which is just the other side of the same coin, is the guy who's tempted to make his wife his mission will just accept and submit to every single concern she brings up without considering whether or not it's actually true or valid. So instead of doing that, you should take the concern your wife brings to you and then consider whether or not it's true. And if it's not true, it's not that she's sinning or anything. It's just that you haven't shared with her your thought process on this thing. So you can help her read the situation properly and ensure that y'all are on the same page going forward with everything. So it's actually a discipling opportunity for you towards her.
Yeah, we might call that the ditch of the figurehead leader. He's not really the head of the home. He's really the head in the sense that he's just always trying to figure out exactly what his wife wants, exactly what she thinks, and he's just ruled by her emotions, desires, instead of, as a head, you really do have the authority. You're a man setting the course for his home. He's saying this is the mission of the home. This is the target we're trying to hit with our life, marriage, parenting, vocation, household, all these things. And now we're in agreement, in alignment on that mission. I'm going to heavily rely on and hear the input of my wife in how to best go about that mission together. But the figurehead leader, he hasn't really set the mission. The mission, like you said, is just making wifey, happy, which, by the way, I hate that phrase. That
He's
word.
just a simp, like a glorified simp.
He's just like saying, if she's happy, I know that she'll be nice to me, and maybe there'll be sexual thing. There'll be all sorts of good things that happen. But at the end of the day, the problem is, does a wife respect a husband who's like that?
No, there's actually a book about this. I don't know if you guys have talked about it in your show, but forget the author at the moment, but it's called The Nice Guy Syndrome.
No, I haven't read that one.
Yeah. And so he actually talks about how in these scenarios, you're trying to be the nice guy. You're always taking straw polls. You're trying to appease your wife, always keep her happy. The irony is she ends up not being happy at all.
Yeah, she's miserable.
Because the reality is you want to be led. You think about politicians in particular. The guy who just always takes a straw poll to see, he's going to make a decision based on what everybody wants.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that is fundamentally not leadership.
No.
And so you can't do that as husbands either. One of the other things, Brian, I was going to bring up is, this whole process of in-home correction between husbands and wives and how that works. Part of the thing that we were talking about is the vital need for the husband to be under the authority of the elders. One of the things that can happen in patriarchal churches that I've seen is you get these guys who are like, I submit to no one. I am the pope of my own life. Mm-hmm. And you'll even get in churches where the dad is the one doling out communion, not the elders.
Yeah.
So I think that's a distortion.
Yeah.
And it's so good for men to have other men that they submit to, because we tend to listen differently to male authority. Mm-hmm. And so that's really good. And that will actually help wives so that she doesn't have to be the only influence in her husband's life, continually saying like, hey, this needs to be dealt with. Hey, this needs to be dealt with. So I think it's sort of like grounding all the authorities in their God-ordained places.
Yep.
And not saying patriarchs aren't men with no authority structure themselves that they have to submit to.
That really circles in on, I think, one of the biggest principles that can help a husband figure this out in his life and marriage and help everybody underneath his authority figure this out. And it's the principle of giving your people permission. I think this is one of the greatest keys to exercising not just leadership in the home, but leadership anywhere, is that everybody who is in any way under your authority, and particularly those people who are closest to you. So the husband's the head of his wife, and then he has his wife who's under his authority, but they're also one flesh in mission, creating children. And then the children are under them both. And so his wife's very close to his authority, and she's also very close to the level of authority that he has in the home. She is his most powerful general, most powerful deputy, is how I put it in marriage counseling a lot. Like, husband, you need to think of your wife as your most powerful deputy, especially as you get closer to the top, the headship structure. The people under authority need to have explicit permission from the head if you have a problem. If you think that I'm not doing something that I need to be doing, if you think I'm sinning, if you think I'm just being unwise in a decision, if there's something you think I'm not seeing, like maybe you're looking and you're going, oh, you're sitting on your hands with this decision our family needs you to make, whatever it is, they need to know that you are open and eager to hear. Because if they don't, then what is the wife to do? Well, she always feels like, well, am I supposed to criticize him? Is that being disrespectful? Should I go, do I have to go talk to the elders before I even talk to him? Because he hasn't even, I feel like I can't bring anything to him. No, my wife, Lexy, has my permission to come to me and say, Brian, I think that this is an area where you need to think, or I think that, you need to consider this. And sometimes even, I was telling the guys, the most helpful criticism I've ever received in my whole life came from my wife. And it was like not even that long ago that she came to me and said, I think that you need to think and know this about yourself and just be aware of it. And she was very respectful. It was a wise appeal. It was helpful, and it was respectful and kind. And I think the fruit that could be born from my wife, who knows me better than anybody else, being able to confidently speak those things into my ear, knowing that hopefully knowing that I'm not going to blow up at her. I'm not just going to dismiss her. And I'm not saying I've never sinned in these ways. Sometimes I have too quickly dismissed or not listened, but I think she generally knows, okay, Brian will listen if I bring something, because she's not bringing it every day. It's a rare thing.
Well, can I ask you, Brian? I totally agree with you. And that's really helpful. What happens to a home when a husband stops listening to his wife?
Man, okay, this is so important, because so many marriage counseling situations I know that we all and many pastors get involved in are the result of exactly this, where a husband's not listening. The wife can take a few avenues, and none of them are good. One of them is she can begin to reach for the tools of the flesh to try and respond to what she's seeing as his sins or his flesh. So she can start saying, well, he's not listening to me. I'm going to turn up the volume. I'm going to become a loud, naggy wife. I'm going to be bitter. He's not listening to me when I go, honey, I think there's something wrong. So I'm going to say, if you don't stop going out with your friends, then I'm packing my, it turns into nagging, bitterness. Another thing she can do that husbands might think their house is doing very well, like, oh yeah, people ask, how's your marriage? Oh, it's great. It's going well. It's just to shut up. She just stops talking. She just internalizes it. She just becomes a mouse.
She knows that her opinions aren't going to count anyway.
No one cares what I think. And man, that is not success. Another thing that she can do, she can go the gossip route. She can say, well, he's not listening to me. Well, my girlfriends will listen to me. Or, God forbid, another man will listen to me. I mean, this can get very dangerous very quickly, where she still has the opportunity to sin. It's not that she's justified in gossip or whatever, but you're, as a leader, you're giving cover to sin. You're making a nice, dark, moist environment for funguses to grow in the cupboard, instead of the light and help and strong leadership. The one place, well, let me actually ask you guys, what do you think, and what do you think happens, and what do you think a wife should do in that situation?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I learned early on, this is like year 1.5 of marriage. We'd had our first child. A lot of people, I think, listening to this, and you'll have friends that you have to counsel or whatever. A lot of people, you'll get in a place where you're stuck, and my wife and I were stuck. And one of the best things that happened to us, we just had a pastor who was like, hey, it seems like you guys are having some issues. Let's talk. We did some counseling with him and his wife, and really, really helpful. So I would say to people, you will sometimes get to places where you and your spouse are stuck. Mm-hmm. And I think it is healthy, normal that you should be able to go to your pastors and say, hey, we need help.
This episode of Bright Hearth is sponsored by Garlands of Grace, which is a wonderful Christian company that offers a variety of very versatile head coverings, head wraps, and headbands for sale for women and girls. They're very versatile. Whether you're head covering for 1 Corinthians 11 reasons or just looking for a pretty and feminine head covering, they've got you covered. Babe, why do we like Garlands of Grace?
I really liked Garlands of Grace because when I was first trying to recover this call to head cover, I didn't necessarily want something that was super trendy and that everyone else was doing. And I found their pieces really feminine and timeless in a way that just a lot of other coverings that you could pick up at Target or on Amazon just weren't. And they are very quality. And if you are a mom trying to cover in a pew with wiggly children, you know how hard it is to actually keep a head covering on.
Yes.
And I really like their volumizer bands that are velvet and they stick to your head, and I have had no issues with them. So yeah, I really like them. And they're a sister-owned company.
Yeah, Christian-owned, sister-owned, and they're all made in the USA. So a great company to support. We would commend you, husbands, if you're listening. Go check this out as a thoughtful gift for your wife or your daughters. They have head wraps for ladies as well as little girls. And they've got a whole lot of different styles, a lot of different beautiful colors, and really great quality company. So we're glad to have them as a sponsor for this episode of Bright Hearth, and you can support us by supporting them. So head over to garlandsofgrace.com. You can use the link in the description of this episode, and we hope that you'll give them your support.
And I would encourage people, too. A lot of times in counseling, you get people who come in when they're at level 10.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, you can come in at level 2.5.
It actually can be done.
It actually can be done.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was going to say, Brian, is this is something we learned in the corporate world. I think it actually comes from the military. But one of the things we were encouraged to do as business leaders was what was called a nameless, rankless debrief. And the military guy explained it. He said it's basically like you take your badges off, you set them on the table, metaphorically.
Yeah, right.
Set them on the table, and you say, okay, what happened with the mission?
Mm-hmm.
And so in our household, we will have this conversation. Maybe we go on a family trip and there's some conflict, there's some chaos. What I will generally do is I'll sit down with my wife and I'll say, okay, nameless, rankless debrief.
Mm-hmm.
That's the code word.
Yeah.
And that means we're not being rude to each other, but that means, hey, let's take off the titles. And again, hear me. I'm not saying you stop being a patriarch or anything like that, but I'm just saying it's your way of signaling to your wife as a leader, hey, I want your honest feedback. This is a time for you to weigh in what went right, what went wrong, how did I fail, what things could be better for next time. I found that these are really helpful. A lot of times I will do them with my children as well. And we'll even, at times we'll even joke about this. Benjamin my oldest, was giving me a hard time the other day because it's break. And they're like, Dad, can we stay up an extra hour? And I was like, what you can do is you can wake up an hour earlier if you would like. And so he said, Dad, I think I need a nameless, rankless debrief right now.
That's good.
That's awesome.
I've never heard that one. That's so good.
Sharp as a whip. But I think creating those spaces and not just being cliche about them, right? Like in business, we'll say, oh, my door's always open. And then your door's actually always shut.
It's like, actually, but it's not, though.
Yeah.
But you as a leader in your home, you need to be the one going to your wife and saying, hey, I'd like to get your feedback. Hey, I'd like to get your input.
Yeah.
What do you think about this? And guys, I mean, if you do that regularly with your wife, and she's a godly, respectable woman, which I'm assuming, Brian, Bright Hearth listeners.
Oh, to the last man, woman,
They are
child.
dangerously based.
Dangerously based. So I think what you'll find is the warmth and the temperature of your marriage will increase greatly. Your wife will generally feel heard and cared for.
Yeah.
And that's a good place to lead from. The other thing I would say, my experience in business and in pastoral counseling, it is always weak and insecure leaders who cannot take feedback.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the guy who's like, don't you question my authority, blah, blah, blah. I immediately think, oh, this guy's weak.
Yeah, exactly.
He's insecure. And so obviously don't be that. And then finally, just encouraging the guys, like, don't wait till your wife has a colossal problem with you and your marriage is falling apart and it's been 6 months.
Yeah.
Don't wait to that point to say, well, I guess we, circling back to what I said at the beginning, I guess we could seek help. I would just encourage the men.
Yeah.
Be cultivating ongoing relationships with pastors, wise men, so that you're just getting a regular dose of input.
Yep.
I do this with, Pastor Dan, Brian, you guys here. If there's ever things that cause tension, I'll just ask one of the wise guys, say, hey, what do you think? What do you think I should do here?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So early in my marriage, my wife and I started to kind of reap the fruits of not having a shared mission and a shared vision for the home. And I had failed to sell my wife on a beautiful vision of beauty for the home. So what that looked like was, I would want to do something, like I'd want to go do a hobby, and my wife would kind of be keeping tabs. And
how often?
Yeah, like, oh, you're kind of going a lot. Like, do you want to spend time together? I can't go for this reason. And a wife can start getting bitter about a husband spending time with other men outside of work.
Yeah.
Because time is precious. So in order for the wife and the husband to have a dynamic where she can come to him with this wise appeal, you have to create an environment where y'all are both working towards the same thing.
Yeah.
If y'all are actually one flesh, but you're not functioning as one flesh, and part of that body is broken or not functioning right, then the other part of the body is not going to be trying to fix it out of love and a desire to stay alive. It's going to be trying to, quote, fix it, but out of bitterness, because you're not actually the same body.
Yeah.
So remember, you're one flesh, and if half of that flesh is not doing the right thing, you want the other half to come and seek a solution out of love so that it too stays alive.
Yeah.
Because if one of you dies, you both die. That metaphor is not literal. So anyway, I would really encourage men to make sure they're cultivating in their home an environment where everyone knows the deal. Everyone knows the plan.
Yeah.
Everyone knows what your family should look like by the time you're dead and gone. Or at least what you want it to look like. That way your wife can know, like, oh, he's spending his money this way because of this.
Yeah.
And then, or she can say, oh, he's spending his money this way, but what about this? So she can go to him and say, hey, I thought we were agreed. Like, this is the deal. I think you should reconsider this. And then he can either respond to that and say, oh my gosh, you're right. That's my bad.
Yeah.
Or actually, I was thinking about this principle. You know, what do you think about that? Does that make sense?
It's really interesting, Ben, because I found that when you lead well and your wife is secure and she trusts you, like just trust the decisions you've made. I've had a lot of conversations with my wife where it'll even be like major life decisions, like buying a house. And she'll say, you know what? Honestly, I trust you. Just buy a house. I will enjoy it and it'll be great. I've also had times in my marriage where I was leading very, very poorly early on. And so there was a lot of tension. So I'm curious, when we talk about mission and developing that in your home, how do you actually lead through that process of selling? You mentioned like selling it to your wife. Like, Brian, what are you actually doing, or what were you doing to cast that vision for your wife?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about the mission of your house, like Ben said, you're talking about not something that is going to be finished in a year or 2 years or 6 months or 5 years. It's something that's going to have effect on everything you do in the next year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. You're really talking about targets that you want to hit with your strength, your life, with the days that God has numbered for you, whether those are few days or many days, with the things that he's given you, with your marriage, your children, your strength, your talents and skills and vocational abilities, whatever it is, your calling, your place, the people around you. So you're trying to figure out, okay, in 50 or 60 years, where do I want to end up? And just start describing that together. Well,
and then you just almost sort of like reverse engineer it then?
Yeah, and then you can reverse engineer the waypoints, and you can filter out everything that is not going to help you hit that target. So it can be counterintuitive, though, because sometimes I think mission talk or like spiritual leadership talk can make a wife not properly filter. So an example would be of good filtering would be, we want to have intergenerational cooperation and wealth building together. And so, where my children and their children are all participating in this family empire. That's the idea. We'd have own space, a foothold here in Ogden, etc. So what that means is that I'm probably not going to prioritize trying to buy a lot of real estate in Cincinnati.
Yeah, right.
Even if there's lots of opportunities, but it doesn't really fit my mission. Maybe it could, whatever, probably not. However, there's a trap that you can fall into where a wife can say like, well, honey, how is it fulfilling our mission for you to go rock climbing with your buddies on Saturday mornings?
Right.
Yeah. And the husband needs to be ready to be able to say, well, I need you to understand something about the way men work, and that for me and for our sons too, as they grow up, to be strong, healthy men have never been made outside of the cohort of all male spaces, sharing things that they're basically hobbies often. Men need to be with men. They need to play chess with men. They need to rock climb with men. They need to go on camping trips with other men. They need to have conversations over a pint, on a Friday night. So there are going to be things sometimes where the husband has to defend space for things that will be recreational, that will be just richness in the life, that are going to be a cost, where he's going to say, I'm genuinely asking my wife to pay a cost for me to be with men, because it's a cost for, especially, like Lexy right now, five kids out of the womb, one in the womb. For me to do anything on an evening, like with other guys, it's a high cost. So I don't try to do it all the time.
So one of the questions, Brian, I want to ask you, because I think that's great. When it comes to hobbies, when it comes to having all male spaces, and I totally agree, you need them. On the one hand, I've counseled guys who they don't have those, and they have maybe a nagging wife, and she's just demanding that he's always with her and with the family. I've seen for hunters, there's like a whole line of shirts, and they're called like hunting widows.
Yeah.
And like these guys will go hunt for like 2 days of the year, and then the wives will gladly put on these shirts and be like, they've made us widows. And to me, it's totally cringe. Usually it makes my wife maddest of all, when she sees this stuff, because you're not giving your man space.
Yeah, to be masculine.
But on the other hand, I've seen guys who are like, their family is growing, their marriage is falling apart, but they're going to be playing golf every Sunday.
Yeah,
They're
a week.
investing tons of money, time, energy, and effort. And a lot of times, those guys, the reason they're hunting 12 weeks out of the year is because their marriage is a mess and they don't want to do the work. So anyway, how do you think through like that whole process of, what is healthy, what's unhealthy for men, and you could say for women too, but on these issues of hobbies, space.
It has to fit. This all comes down to, at the center, love for one another first, and then order of duties. So it doesn't matter how perfectly you align your duties. And as like, for example, if a wife doesn't respect and love her husband, he could do everything right. I mean, he could come home, help with the dishes, do the help put kids to bed, change the diapers, work hard at his job, get up early, all this stuff. And then he's like, okay, babe, I'm going to go once a month and I'm going to go golf with my friend, with some guys. She'd be like, can I get some help around here?
Yeah.
If she doesn't love him and respect him and actually want him to have joy and grow as a man, these are essential for male growth, then it won't work. Same in reverse. If the husband doesn't love and respect his wife, if he doesn't actually see her as a creature and as one of his charges and tenderly care for her and want to make her flourish and have joy, to the point where he'd be willing to drop anything if it's needful to minister to his wife, then getting all the external things wrong won't help. But once you have that love, where you're like, we love each other, we're for each other, we really do want the other person. Like, I'm happy when my wife gets to do something that really is enjoyable to her. Maybe I take some of the kids, she does, something with just her and Daphne. Or once you have that, it's all about getting the order of duties right. Where if a husband he's got the first 3 levels of the foundation stones, he's providing well. His wife isn't constantly anxious about money. He's providing himself well. He's giving time to his family. He's there. He's present and tender. He's giving his wife conversation. He's pursuing her emotionally, sexually, all the different ways that he needs to pursue her. And then on top of that, there's this important part of the pyramid where then she understands, like, my husband is a man. He needs to be in the company of men. And my sons, as they grow up, are going to need to be in the company of their father and other men. So when he goes backpacking for 4 days in July, in the high Uintas, even before the kids are old enough to go with him, I'm so for that. I'm actually delighted that he's going to do that, because I know it's going to bear great fruit in our marriage and in our children.
I think that's great what you said, though. Like, his priorities are in order.
It's all about the duties being in order, but the trap is sometimes a husband can feel like it doesn't matter what he does, his wife's never happy.
She's just never going to let him go do those things.
And I know the typical complementarian response is like, well, he must be failing somewhere. And I'm like, yeah, he needs to take responsibility. But listen, ladies, there is such thing as a nagging, loud wife who is impossible to live with. So you need to inventory yourself. Are you difficult to please? Like,
are you high maintenance?
Are you high May?
Well, we had a professor, Stuart Scott, biblical counseling. I think he was at John MacArthur's church, but he said this one time, and it was so poignant. But he said, if you are a person who is high preference, you just have to let your preferences be known at all times. He said, you are going to be miserable to live with.
Yes.
Yeah. So
don't be a preferential person. Prefer your spouse.
Yep.
So in terms of men-only spaces and husbands and fathers taking time to be with other guys, even if it's not with the kids.
Yeah,
like
even if it's not with the kids.
So this is one of the benefits of operating under a shared vision, where you don't have this laundry list of like a billion things that you have to go through and check, like, okay, is this right? Is this right? Is this right? You're operating under a handful of principles.
Yeah.
Because, again, this is a vision for the whole life. If it's just a vision till the end of the year, then, yeah, the laundry list makes sense. Like, are you doing this?
Yeah.
But if you're operating under principles, then you can see long term why something like the elders at the gates type of environment is important. Because part of your vision is going to be a robust community and culture with other families.
Yep.
The only way that you're going to accomplish that principle is by spending time with
Yep.
other people and families.
Yep.
So the man, even when their kids are young, is going to have to go and prove himself to other men to ensure he actually deserves a spot in that gang of men.
Yeah.
And then that's going to build rich culture that the boys and girls can grow up into.
Yes.
So when you have the shared vision and you have the principle, it's much less difficult for a wife to be naggy unless she's just inclined to it.
Yeah.
Because she's going to be able to see the reason that her husband's doing this. And he might have to remind her and she might have to remind him, sure, whatever. But
This is an important point that you make. This is really quick, is that the goal is always to do what you can to make it harder for your spouse to sin. As a husband, I'm just going to try to make it difficult for my wife to sin. I'm going to be reasonable. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to be tenderhearted. And the wife, I'm going to make it difficult for my husband to sin. I'm going to respect him. I'm going to love him. I'm going to be for
so
him.
often we're doing these.
We're doing the opposite. We're
the
trying to make it easy for me to get mine, which is just we're like rolling out the red carpet for our spouse's flesh.
that's
saying,
big two flesh mindset.
Come on up.
That is not one.
It's not one flesh mindset.
Is your arm going to punch your stomach until you throw up? No, because it's
No.
the same body.
One body. Yeah.
So, Brian, I have another question. Earlier episode of Bright Hearth, you guys were talking about date nights.
Yeah.
And the need to just fall in love with the ordinary. Really great episode. How do you, in this situation, how do you not get in the phase where guys or gals are saying, you know what, I'm keeping track of every time the other guy is, the spouse is out.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get mine. And then you're living on this cycle. Because I feel like this can happen. I need a girl's night. And it's like, girl, wash your face. That type of I need some me time.
Mm-hmm.
What's a healthy balance between saying what we are saying
Yeah.
versus that?
Yeah. The difference is it really comes down to the mission of what are you aiming for in your household? What does success look like? Does it look like going tit for tat in I got an hour a week, he gets an hour a week. She gets 3 hours this Saturday. Well, the next Saturday I get 3 hours. If you're keeping score in your marriage, you're actually not engaged in love, you're engaged in commerce. It's a different thing.
Yeah.
Commerce is great. It's great that when I hire a contractor to do a job on my property, I'm going to hopefully get 3 hours of work for 3 hours billed to me at $75 an hour. But that's not one flesh. That's not love. That's contractual. Now, love has covenantal, legal, obligational, duty relationships. But I'm to do all of those things even out of love. So instead of trying to go tit for tat, what we're trying to do is Hebrews, outdo one another in showing honor. Or is that Romans?
I don't think it's Hebrews.
I think it's Romans 12. Anyway, outdo one another, Romans 12:10 maybe. Outdo one another in showing honor, which requires a husband to know what a wife, how she ticks.
Romans 12:10.
Romans 12:10. Okay, know how a wife ticks.
Nice.
And say, it's like
Flex.
I got it wrong first. So it's like Kobe calling his shot and hitting it the second time.
Yeah, but it's
whatever.
almost more impressive to correct yourself slowly and then get it right.
It was all
shooting.
planned. I had it here written out, whole thing.
Keep shooting like you never miss.
That's right. Steph Curry.
First try.
Boom. No, but you're knowing your wife. You're saying, okay, what does a woman need, and what does this particular woman need? She does. Some ladies are like, they just get charged up by getting to go have a breakfast out with their lady friends. My wife is not actually like that. Some of your wives are like that. Some of you ladies are. If that's your wife, then a husband who loves his wife is going to work hard to try to provide that space for his wife. And a wife who loves her husband isn't going to nag him and try to control him into getting it. Okay? Your wife might just be really into after bedtime, as much as possible, we're together. You're not listening to a podcast or doing a project or doing. We're together. We're reading next to each other, whatever it is. That's Lexy. Lexy's big into that, right? So I love her. So I have to be aware that I'm more independent. I might be tempted to. I like taking long walks at night, or listening to a book or something, and walking 5-8 miles after bedtime. And she's it's cost for her. So it's not that I'm not going to do that. It's just that I'm going to make sure that I'm honoring my wife.
Yeah.
When you both love each other and you know each other, a lot of the friction goes away, but there is a skill aspect of where a man can just underestimate how different a woman is from him, and a woman can underestimate how different a man is. So she might simply not understand what it means to him to go backpacking with his dude. Yeah. She might completely not understand how meaningful and important it is in a man's life to go hunting for a week a year. She might not understand that at all. She might be like, I don't get it. And the thing is, ladies, you won't. It's okay.
And here's the real trouble with that is that a lot of men can't articulate why it's important. They just know that it is.
Yeah.
So men figure out a way to articulate that.
Yeah.
So that you can convince your wife. But all this is also just basic respect.
It's just basic.
So when
respect.
you have a family that's seeking a goal, that's productive, that's worshiping the Lord, people are working very hard.
Yes.
The husband will see how hard the wife is working and will appreciate it.
Yep.
The wife will see how hard the husband is working and will appreciate it.
Yep.
And when you appreciate it, it causes you to rejoice in rewarding your spouse with things that you know they love to do.
Yep.
So you're not counting the cost. It's not commerce.
No.
It's economy.
Yeah.
It's economy with love at the root and respect for the other person.
Yeah.
So that you're not like begrudgingly giving your wife a pedicure a day at the nail salon. You love to do it because she has been busting her back to help you accomplish your mission.
And a lot of the errors that men make in the exercise of their headship is they don't actually give their wife authority over what she should have authority over that's real. So like the house.
Yeah, she's the Oikos despot, right?
I used to spend way too much energy worrying about how the house would be decorated and like trying to have input on all that. And now I care, but letting my wife do it means it will be done better. Like she told me, I'm going to paint our room because she knows that she has my trust and authority here. So I was like, cool, tell me what color. I know you're not good at painting. She's definitely like Lexi's her spiritual gift, not painting. Like she's really bad at it.
Did she take the test?
She did. It was on the 5, whatever it is. And so I painted the wall this blue color I never would have picked. And now I walk in my room and I'm like, this is amazing. I love this color. I think it looks great. She knew that she wasn't going to paint it like fluffy pink and I have to be there too. But sometimes a husband just walks around and he exercises authority everywhere and he thinks authority means telling everybody what to do all the time. But if you just understand your wife's creatureliness, her skills, and your heart trusts in her, and you say, I want you to take the stuff I'm giving you and turn a profit on it, then you'll actually find out that wired into her nature, just as important as you being in all male spaces, is her having a home to shape and to spend money on that you might think is weird. Why do we need a tray for the boots that is made out of copper at the front door? The boots can go on the ground. I don't understand it. And then one day you just grow as a man and you understand that this is her domain. She has this feminine instinct that's beautiful and glorious. And you need to treat her with understanding. 1 Peter 3:7, you need to live with her in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel. But Peter's actually saying in 1 Peter 3:7 there, you're honoring her for what she is. You're treating her with the grain of her nature, and you're giving her what she needs to rejoice in, the children and the home and the environment that she has authority and she can shepherd, and she needs you to bring the resources in. So many husbands are like, I'm going to give you way too little money, way too little authority, no respect, no freedom, and then I'm going to be mad when you're not happy with me.
Well, it's interesting because I was talking to a pastor one time who really helped me as a man understand this dynamic. But he said, okay, so basically you're micromanaging your wife. When you're like nitpicking everything she bought at the grocery store, you're going through. And he said, okay, let's picture this. Which man in the workplace likes to be micromanaged?
Oh, yeah.
So at the time I was doing estimating for construction. Mm-hmm. And he said, how about this? He said, I give you some plans, you estimate, and I'm going to stand over your shoulder the whole time and be like, no, not that. Okay, that. No, not that.
Ugh.
And he goes, Matt, that's how your wife feels.
Yep.
When you create this space where, she has to come to you for every single decision. Can I buy these eggs? Yep. Do I need to buy these eggs? Should I buy
And if this principle is hard for you to understand if you're a guy, think of it creationally. Men are like the mavericks of creation, where they go and they take dominion and they tame wild places, barring sin, by whatever means possible. Men are just like, we're going to figure this out.
Yeah.
They kind of MacGyver their way through dominion taking.
Yeah,
and then
You get to Mach 10 and you're like, just a little
and you're
more.
like 10.3.
Such a good scene.
Yeah.
I don't
really
care
good.
how unrealistic it is to survive
It's so
ejecting at Mach
realistic.
10. I don't even care.
It's real.
You would disintegrate.
Don't even care.
I went to college. It's realistic.
Ben literally fixed airplanes for the military that were broken.
It's
So
not realistic.
You would know.
Joke's over.
It's not realistic.
But
anyway, continue.
No, anyway, so yeah, men, they go in and take dominion, and if it's messy, it's okay. They're still taming wild places. Women then follow the men, and she is not a maverick. Oftentimes, women are more perfectionists than guys are because she's supposed to beautify something that has just been tamed.
You're taking raw resources.
Yes, the man tames. The woman then beautifies. It's not the other way around. And the man certainly doesn't do both. That's not his gifting.
And I've often thought about it in the home in terms of, okay, you're bringing in these raw resources, a paycheck. And then your wife is taking that and turning it into beautiful, like the details of beauty within the home, whether it's a, warmly cooked loaf of bread, whether it's, in my case, a steak.
Go on. Warmly cooked loaf of
Have I told
steak.
you about the good news of carnivore?
Please, please.
No.
No carnivore on Bright Hearth. we're on record.
Did you ask Liver King into your heart?
Oh my word. He's so natty. Anyway, our Bright Hearth listeners right now are, what is natty?
Yeah,
mean?
I'm sorry.
Who
If
is
you want to
Liver
know
King?
more, go to the Hardman
Yeah,
podcast.
okay. Here's what I do want to ask you guys, circling back, and we'll round it out here and land the plane. Just practically, what can a wife do if she feels like she's never heard and has no permission to bring helpful criticism? What are her options? How does she act?
Yeah, the first thing I would, if you happen to be, you're pastoring and you're part of this council, generally I'll say to the husbands, like, you need to listen to your wife.
Yep.
But unfortunately, a lot of times what's happening is I never hear those conversations because the wife, rightly, in some sense, they feel like going to a pastor is going around their husband, and that can cause very real problems. But I would generally encourage ladies, well, that's fine. Let the pastors deal with that then.
Yeah.
I also, by the way, I tell my wife regularly, not only asking for feedback, but I tell her regularly, if you think that I am in sin, like serious sin, not just like, hey, we disagree, but if there's serious sin, even if it's the sin of like totally neglecting you or refusing to hear you on an issue, you have Pastor Dan, you have Pastor Brian, the Kevins, you have their numbers. And I tell her this, you have my permission. You have my permission to seek them out for my good.
Yes.
Because if I'm calcified in sin, then do me the loving thing of telling the pastors.
Yeah.
So, and we have that, we have that understanding, and she's the same way. It's like if there's times where we're like, look, we're getting nowhere with this conflict. That's what the pastors are for. Again, you mentioned it early, but it's like, okay, don't gossip.
Yes. Don't gossip.
Don't go tell all the ladies in the church. Don't complain about it. And a lot of times what will happen too, I've seen this with, sometimes people are in bad churches. I remember particularly counseling one lady. They're in a really bad church. Her husband's a loser. He happened to be, I think he was on like the computer, for hours on end.
Yeah.
Lock himself in his room and
Yeah.
playing whatever. And they were in a church where the pastors were not shepherding. And so they said, well, unless he's committing some grievous sin, it's probably no big deal. We don't really get involved with stuff like that. And I remember saying in that sense, and then I said, well, you need to find a different church then.
Yeah.
But it can be tricky because that's his decision and he didn't want to leave and so on and so forth. So I think that it can get pretty messy. But this is why I think, too, the last thing I'll say, and then pass the torch here. This is why you need to make sure you're in a good, healthy church before you're in the middle of a colossal conflict.
Right.
So a lot of times people wait till things are really horrible and they're like, dang it, now we realize we have poor leadership
Well, this
in the
mega
church.
church where we're never allowed to see a pastor ever who has no idea who we are, doesn't even know our name. Oh, no, it doesn't cut it. No, really?
Yeah. Shocker.
So that's what would be my encouragement is find a church that you can find shepherding for your family before it gets to that point?
Yeah, there was just last night, a couple in the church texted me. It's like 8:30, 9 o'clock. And they had some simple disagreement where they were like, I don't know if this is an ethical situation, this decision we have to make or not. One person thinks, no big deal, let's do it. Another third person thinks, I think it's sinful if we do this. And they just texted me, and we like voice memoed each other back and forth like for 5 minutes. And that was it. They figured it out, and they were like, okay, good to go. We just needed a little outside input. And nobody was being disrespectful or rude to my knowledge, whatever, to my knowledge. And I was thinking like,
that's healthy.
Wow, this is good. They're in my parish here in the church. They're my people. I should know the state of the flock. I'm thankful that they came to me then. Instead of like stewed on it for 3 weeks, we had this decision. We ended up fighting about 15 other things that were really about that. Man, like, call the fire department when the stove catches on fire. Not like, well, it's just the stove. I mean, there's a lot more of the house. Well, once the house is all on fire, it's kind of too late. Not really, but I mean, in the metaphor. Yeah. But anyway, continue.
No, I would say first step for the woman, pray and ask the Lord for his help. Mm-hmm. Make sure that the foundation of you're trying to do this is godly and holy and not out of bitterness. The Lord certainly looks very kindly on his daughters seeking to do good by their husbands. That is all through Scripture, so definitely pray. And then seek first to build that relationship in a gentle and respectful way by asking your husband how you can do it in a way that will ensure he doesn't feel disrespected. So ask your husband, not when you're trying to do it.
Yeah.
Don't be like, hey, I have something to tell you. How can I do it?
How can I do it?
Just be like, hey, if something were to ever come up, how could I approach you in a way that would ensure you know that I am not trying to disrespect you. Yeah. I'm trying to love you. And if he's obstinate, then of course you should go to your pastors and ask for help. And like they said before, don't be afraid to seek counsel when you're at a 2 instead of waiting till you're at a 10. Yeah. It's much better to go earlier. If you just kind of notice the pattern where your husband is absolutely not having it, then you should just go. Don't try to fix it on your own at that point. Just try to go to your pastors and ask for help.
Yeah, and a wise pastor is able to say, like, okay, let's say a wife comes to me when it's a 2 or 3. It's just that she's like, I don't really know what to do. I don't want to talk to all the ladies and just, air my stuff, because you shouldn't do that. A wise pastor is going to say, okay, these are people in my flock. I'm going to call the husband and just say, hey, you guys are in our church. We split up our membership according to smaller groups called parishes that one elder has more direct oversight over. So instead of trying to know 150 people at all times, you can know 15 or 30 or 20, which is much more doable. So, I might call a guy and say, I'm just going to make up a name. Like, hey, Roger, you're in my parish. Just calling to check in. I was, talking the other day with your wife, and it sounded like you guys were maybe having trouble working through something. And I just wanted to say, how can I help? Is there, what's going on? If it's a 2 or 3 kind of issue, the pastor's not going to call up your husband, hopefully, and say, like, go full Mark Driscoll on him. Who the heck do you think you are? How dare you? You loser of a husband. You're just failing. Like,
Jesus wants the
now Matt Chandler.
Matt Chandler too.
Yeah, Matt Chandler's entered the chat.
Matt Driscoll.
Hopefully a pastor knows how to wisely handle this. We're constantly trying to help husbands not get run over and feel disrespected, because it's not helpful if he feels like he's a child being berated by his wife and a pastor now. So a lot of wives think that if they go to their pastor, it's going to be like, well, then we're teaming up on the guy. Well, no. The husband's or the pastor's role is to hear both sides, call balls and strikes, help lead everybody into obedience to Christ, not to team up.
Well, and Brian, we talked about this too. This has come up before numerous times in counseling, but there are times where I'll sense that that's going on. You have a husband and wife, and I'm like, wow, I really am going to have to address the husband mainly here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times what I'll do is I won't do it in that meeting.
Right.
I'll actually schedule a follow-up later with him so that it isn't an emasculating experience.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true. A lot of this, again, you have to have pastors you trust, because some pastors will handle it foolishly. Some churches won't handle it at all. They'll brush it off.
You want to be a white knight?
Yeah, like, man, you need membership in a healthy church that understands sex piety and these kinds of things. So Let me give you just some last principles here, and then we'll wrap it up to kind of put a bow on it here. What we're saying is that a husband's authority as a patriarch, as the head of his home, does not mean that his wife cannot bring helpful criticism, because there is no human authority where that is the case. Any human authority where that's not possible, below Christ who's sinless, that's tyrannical. A general, the highest ranking officer in the U.S. military, is by his code supposed to hear criticism from his subordinates. And they should be able to do that without retribution, right? That's in the code. Now, people sin, generals sin, kings sin, husbands sin, pastors sin. A pastor who cannot hear criticism from his flock, who are told, by the way, to obey and submit to their elders. Hebrews 13, 7, and 17 make that clear. And yet, members of the church are very free to come and bring helpful critique or questions or whatever it is to the pastors. So wives, you are free, and you actually, as a helpmeet, should be thinking about how to help your husband holistically. And that includes sometimes bringing criticism to him. So the question is, how do you do it? And the word I want to put in your ear, we've used it already. The phrase is a wise appeal. That's what you're aiming to make. What is a wise appeal? Well, it's a wise concern brought righteously. That's what a wise appeal is. It's a wise concern brought righteously and in wisdom. So you see something in your husband, you need to start by doing this inventory. Am I a nag? Is this something I can cover over? Am I being really hard to please right now? Sometimes it'll never get past that. Okay, no, I don't need to bring this to my husband. Whatever, he did something I didn't like, but it's not a pattern. It's not a big thing. I'm just going to cover this over. Great. Bring it to the Lord. Second step, have I brought it to the Lord? Have I prayed like Ben said? Once I've done that, okay, am I coming respectfully in a time that's not heated? Am I coming with an attitude of submission and respect and love for my husband, with an eagerness to help him and to love him? Am I going to be teachable? If he thinks I'm wrong, will I hear him out, hear his side of the story before I conclude that my thoughts are always right? Sometimes they're not. And then once you've done that, as you bring the concern to your husband, it's like Matthew 18. If he receives it, it's great. You've won your brother. Celebrate, encourage him, move on. Don't nag about it the next day. Mm-hmm. If he doesn't, and if there's a pattern where you feel like there's a serious enough thing, it's really it's not just a one or two. It's like, this is something that over time is really going to be a bad fruit in our marriage. Then we're telling you that God built multiple spheres of authority into the world for a reason. And you are free to go to those other spheres. And in this case, it would often be your pastor. Go to a pastor privately. This should go without saying, all this should be done privately, never in front of other people, including your kids. You go to a pastor, you say, Pastor so-and-so, I think I've got this issue. I'd like some counsel on it or some help. A good pastor will hear you out, help, do whatever's necessary, and then work for your husband's good. On the husband side, men, you need to give your husband, you need to give your wife, wow. Oops. Men, you need to give your wife permission. If you haven't done that, I would encourage you to do that. Next time you have a family meeting, family worship, whatever, give your kids and your wife permission. Honey, I want to be a good leader. If there's anything that, like Eric said, if there's anything to be helpful for my good, I want to hear it out from a place of love and respect from you, and I'll be open to listen. So you have my permission to bring concerns. And even your kids should have permission. Son, daughter, if you have a problem, I want you to feel free to come to mom and dad respectfully, and we'll deal with it. And what that does is it just gives everybody freedom. Everybody knows what their job is. Everybody underneath you is not concerned and anxious about whether or not they're even allowed to say something. Shouldn't even be a question. Of course you're allowed. And if we do that and we seek to outdo one another in showing honor, then the marriage will be a garden. But if we make the marriage a place where criticism is never allowed, where repentance and humbling never happens, that's a great place to grow weeds really quickly that choke out fruit and joy and end up turning a 4 or a 3 into a 7 or an 8 or a 10. So nip these things early. Don't reach for the tools of the flesh. And thanks for listening to this episode of Bright Hearth. As always, we appreciate all of your support for our patrons at patreon.com. There's a link in the description if you would like to join in with supporting the show, helping us continue to make it possible. There are all sorts of rewards for different tiers of our patrons there. I think every patron actually receives access to our patron exclusive episode in the kitchen that we do every week with our main episodes. A short little bonus podcast that's just for patrons there. Some tiers also get incredible swag. I mean, we're talking like Feed the Patriarchy mugs, things like that will just signal your basedness to the world as you drink your coffee. And we, as usual, like to thank our sponsor for this episode, Garlands of Grace. Ladies, pick up beautiful head coverings and other garments and accessories for women and girls there. And husbands, great place to get your wife a gift. Good Christian company that we're glad to partner with and support this season. But may the Lord bless you and your households, cause his face to shine upon you, and give you the grace needful to make it through today. See you next time.